So what I was thinking we would do today is, oh, I gotta turn these captions off. It's distracting. Okay. Um, so I had three ideas. One is we could just have an open discussion. I know y'all started at the end of the last meeting where people were just kind of like asking questions and kind of doing some general non-structured sense making, and I think that's great. The other thing is I think we could start brainstorming either things we should be doing in the sense doing part of actions, or questions we need to ask in order to get to that. So kind of start that discussion. And then I did want to kind of have maybe at the end of this meeting, kind of a more of a meta discussion. There was a lot of good feedback that we were spending a lot of time talking about the tools, and I definitely agreed with that. Noticed that on the call I was on. There's a bad habit OGM has when we're using a tool to give feedback on the tool at the time, and I think for this group, it would be good to separate that. But we do kind of need to have some meta discussion. So my preference would be that we start, let's kind of brainstorm, talk about things we might want to do or can do, or what we need to research to figure out what we need to do to take action in this topic. But if people feel the need to have more of an open, kind of unstructured discussion about indoor air quality, if Jerry was here, I would say also masks, if anyone's passionate about that. So how does everyone feel, or did anyone have any other desires for the meeting today?
I would like to understand what SenseDoing is, or what the lab is trying to accomplish more. I feel like we don't have a consensus view of that, and so I'm always a little on edge, feeling like I'm not accomplishing, or it's not accomplishing what I want. And maybe
what do
other
you
people
want?
feel the same way.
What do you want?
I would be, for me, SenseDoing is kind of a spiritual descendant of sense making for emergent events, which is the project I ran for COVID, and before that for the bank collapse, I think, or something like that. But basically, to have a so the output of sense making for emergent events is to have kind of a playbook. So when something amazing happens, amazingly crazy happens, you can kind of open the playbook and say, here's how to look for sources, here's how to look for experts, here's what to do about misinformation, here's how to start to recognize misinformation and categorize it separately and things like that. The point of that for me is to reduce to increase the signal in conversations and reduce the noise quickly, so that it doesn't take us 6 months or 12 months to kind of realize what's going on and start to manage it. The COVID thing got much worse than it needed to, because everyone was running around with their heads chopped off for a year, and we blew the opportunity on masks. So Joanne and I are out in public once in a while. We don't go out we go out outside a lot, not in crowded places a lot. So we're wearing our masks, and I'm thinking how stupid we look compared to everybody else who's not wearing masks. And I'm like, if we had all just done the isolation and masking thing for 2 months in, June of 2020, it would have been over. That's all it would have taken, We could have just killed the pandemic in its tracks, and we wouldn't have had continuing lockdowns. We could have given up on masking. We wouldn't have to worry about indoor air quality, which maybe that's a good thing and a good positive outcome. But so, we in some alternate universe, we could have averted the worst of it by by sense making quickly in a hurricane of information. And that's so I'm interested in the SenseDoing lab because maybe we'll be working on that.
So yeah, I think this is kind of a meta discussion, which is fine, about SenseDoing. Does anyone else want to take a stab at what Pete just did and talk about what they would like? I could dive in, but
I want to hear what you want, Bentley, because I think you and Peter are the ones that care more than, I mean, I don't want to speak for Joanne and Jack, but I would like to hear what you want.
Yeah, if anyone else wants to go first, but if not.
I could say something. I forget, I should have raised my hand. Can I go first, Bentley?
Please do.
Okay. So I didn't know what this was going to be. I don't know how many weeks I've been on these calls, but I feel like we've got nowhere. And so I feel like it's taking a long time to get anywhere. Does anybody else feel that way? And last week, finally, I remember at one point last week, we had a half an hour left, and there was a pause in the conversation. I said, well, so, and Stacy said, I'd still like to learn more about air filtration or something like that, or masks. And I said, yeah, can we just talk about it? And Jerry said, no, I'm not prepared. I'm like, why can't we just talk about it? And then Jerry said, you mean I could? So Jerry did his thing, his brain, and John was basically quiet because he'd already done his thing previously. But I think that's what, like, I thought people getting together, like if we'd done that the first or the second week where people are like, okay, let's talk about air filtration, and Jerry could be doing his brain, John could be coming up with ideas. Like if we were all like, why is it taking so many weeks to, that's my frustration. And one thing that Peter said that we could have gotten it all done in 2 months, whatever, and maybe we wouldn't need air filtration. I disagree about the air filtration. People keep talking about we should be prepared for the next one. A lot of people feel like we're over COVID and, you know, there'll be a next one. People pretty much agree there's going to be a next one. And air filtration is something we should be doing to prepare for the next one, because if you get stuff either by touching bodily fluids or fomites or aerosols. And if it's aerosol and we haven't been spending, people say, oh, for COVID, it's going to take a couple of years to get everybody. Let's do it now. Like we should be talking about how important it is for the next one to be doing it. You know, like what have we learned from COVID? There's going to be a next one. What can we do so that we don't have to have a shutdown next time? If buildings everywhere had proper air filtration, maybe you don't have to shut down. If people just know on public transportation you wear masks, you know, you might not have to shut down. You could do the things that greatly reduce transmission of aerosols if it's a pandemic of aerosol stuff, which that's how aerosol stuff is the stuff that gets spread. If it's just bodily fluids, it's easier to avoid bodily fluids. You know, HIV, people weren't as freaked out about HIV. You had to touch bodily fluids. So, you know, it spread a lot, but not as quickly as COVID. So I think air filtration is something we should be calling our representatives about it. And if they don't want to talk about it in terms of COVID, you could use the studies that are out. The Harvard study is one of them that says that, you know, you test a lot better if the CO2 levels are under a certain amount. I mean, wouldn't parents all over the world want their parents always, you know, to test better, or employers want their employees to function at a higher level when they're at work. So air filtration, you know, if you can't go down the pandemic route or the COVID route, let's talk about what it does in terms of productivity. So that's my 2 cents.
Jack, do you want to dive in, or are you just listening for now? Do you have any wants or desires out of this?
Well, I haven't been that active in this group, so I don't know that I don't know that I have a dog in the fight, but let's face it, I'm big on sense making, and sense doing seems to me what happens when you realize that most of everything that we do is something like herding cats. It really doesn't go anywhere. And I think Johanna was speaking to that using different words. I'm not putting words in her mouth, but my sense about the entirety of OGM is that it's a bunch of aimless cats trying to occasionally finding some meow mix and going crazy for a while and then going to the next pile of meow mix. And I think OGM could be. I mean, the quality of the people, with very few exceptions, the quality of people in OGM is just sterling. It's beyond one's imagination that you could get such a large group of really thoughtful people together, but can you actually make some sense from it? Well, I think most of you are familiar with Dunbar's number, which was the largest stable social network is 150 people. And he since reduced that to around 6. And in fact, we heard, you may not have heard, but Dave Snowden says it's actually 3. And so, and that recording is going to be, it was done in one of the people-centered internet Sunday morning lectures. And that recording is going to be made available. And I'm kind of hoping that I'll find the bandwidth to issue map it into a compendium document so that people can see the graph of everything he had to say. It's stunning. And so there's a total of 5 of us here. We're right at the edge of the lower Dunbar number, and we're way out of bounds for what Dave Snowden says. But what Snowden says is you want to have hundreds or thousands of groups of 3, and then to sense make from their outputs, rather than ask a large crowd to do any work. All I'm saying is SenseDoing to me is kind of like what Pete was looking for, getting some things done, some real things done. And let's face it, when we did Free Jerry's Brain, Jerry wanted to expand it, and I said, no, do not let it go over 5 or 6 people. And that 5 or 6 people literally kicked Fanny, literally produced some really cool stuff. Bentley being one of the kings of that process. All I'm saying is that very small groups can, under the right circumstances, do some serious work. Right now, we're not doing a free Jerry's Brain. We're still trying to figure out what SenseDoing means. And so it's a worthy cause to spend the time sense making what SenseDoing is about before setting off on whatever. But ultimately, you're going to have to pick something. And you were working on masks and so forth, the big battle over do masks work and so on and so forth. I'm a little bit like Pete. I still go out in public with a mask on, and it's rather rough. But when you do see somebody else with a mask on, you feel like, there's sane people out here, really. And it's kind of pleasing. We went to see the cherry blossoms at Japanese Garden at Balboa Park a week ago, and I think I counted 5 people with masks on out of the hundreds that were there. So it's the way we work. I've said all I need to say, I think.
So let me I don't have any solutions, which I hate kind of poking at problems when I don't have solutions, but let me kind of bring up what I've been hearing over the last several meetings. I hear a desire for kind of open, unstructured dialogue on a topic. And I think that has a lot of value. But I think that's what OGM in general tends to do. I mean, that's what the Thursday calls are, right? So I don't think that will bring us to an action. I also still think the name SenseDoing is completely wrong. Because it means so many different things to so many different people. And then when you explain it, people immediately forget what you explained and go back to their initial understanding every time they hear the word. And I'm happy going with let's kind of have open discussions. And I'm happy with most of the paths. What I wanted out of this, I don't think is obtainable or fair to the group, because it's getting further and further from what the group wants to do. What I, wanted was, data for an argument on a small Boolean kind of yes, no decision. Should we enact this policy? Or should we, is this fact true or false or stuff like that? And that's just, even though that's a sub part of it, it's not worth the time of this group to focus on that. So then without my kind of main goal being accomplished, I'm less passionate about it. I think general sense making and action taking are mutually exclusive, being done at the same time. Like you kind of have to toggle between them. But that's just an intuition. I don't have proof for that. So like when we asked Pete, what do you want out of this? I heard a lot of talking and then went to the specifics of mass, but I did not hear an answer to that question. And I've been able to kind of answer what I would like out of this, but the answer is I'm not going to get that out of this. And I hear Joanne talk about, let's talk about it, but I don't see that resulting in, without some sort of structure, I don't see it resulting in an actual action. So, I don't know, I guess if I was God King, I would say, let's have an open discussion where everyone gets their questions out about indoor quality or masking, and let's decide to come together and say, let's decide, let's make some suggestions on what are solid actions to take and the evidence that backs up those actions. So I guess that's kind of my proposal for a path forward, but I don't know that that's any good. So yeah, so Joanne, what do you think about that?
That's exactly what I left out was, I thought we'd start with a discussion, put stuff on the board, and then at the end, and it doesn't even have to be that long a discussion. At the end, it's like, what do we want to do? Or what are the key focus? What are the, if talking to somebody else, what are the key ways to talk about it? Or what are the actions we want to take? That's what I meant. You start with the discussion of the topic and you put on the whiteboard stuff. That's exactly what yes. I feel like I feel like there's not been a lot done over the last several weeks. Maybe it has, it's just evaded me. Like I'm not seeing it.
I don't think it was anything that most of us wanted accomplished. Like, I mean, there is a policy keys. I mean, there was a deliverable. It just wasn't anything any of us really wanted. Yeah. So how's that as a path forward?
I'm pleased. It's like a gift from the gods or something. We have done some interesting things, and I value that. I do treasure it, but it's not what I asked for.
So Pete, I still don't know what you're asking for, but is it, from what Joanne said, does that sound like a path forward? We discuss the topic in general and come to do some general unstructured sense making, and then we say, here are some possible actions that we may take or suggest, and then we kind of work through that. Does that feel like it would be valuable?
So So the thing I was wishing for, and I don't think I ever stated this as such, but let me try to make my previous answer. I thought I kind of said it, but I probably kind of skittered around. I wish there was a playbook for SenseDoing. I would love to see 10,000 words, 5,000 words or something. You know, you find yourself in a maelstrom of information. You know, what do? You know, take a deep breath, set up a database. Here's the general schema for the database. Here's how to ingest a fire hose of information. Here's how to filter it and arrange it. Here's how to have teams, whether they're 3 teams or teams of 3 or teams of 6 or teams of 150. Have some sense doers, make sense, and then critically, to live up to the name. I think it's a cool thing. We kind of challenged ourselves with the doing thing, but you know, and here's how to take made sense into action. You know, oh, it turns out we should be wearing masks, or it turns out we should be working on indoor air quality. That means that the sense doers have to shift focus and write their Congress people or create an explainer video or whatever, right? So then to make that even shorter, my wish, never really stated, is not previously stated, is that we had a playbook for sense making and sense doing, especially for hurricane level information events, like a pandemic, like the World Trade Center being hit by terrorists, like the GameStop thing. The GameStop thing is an interesting one in there, because in the grand scheme of things, it was a small event, but the thing that makes it feel to me like a sense making for emergent event situation is that, you know, you go from 0 information on day -1, and then on day 0, you have like 1,000% information, and you can't do anything with it, and you don't know what's going on. And then over time, you find experts, you find good explanations, you know, and you find bad actors trying to misinform and misdirect, you know. And then so it's a smaller thing than the World Trade Center event, for instance, but it has the same characteristics of way too much information and way too much confusion that should be much easier. Maybe should is the wrong word then. This is maybe the operational thing. It seems really obvious to me that we could compress the sense making and then enhance the sense doing that we do. And now thinking about it, maybe that's just a folly. Maybe it's a human nature kind of thing that I'm used to seeing in other places. Of the same kind of thing where Doug Engelbart's augmentation, I feel like, is an easy thing to imagine and an almost impossible thing to actually effect, given humans and the way they work. So maybe sense doing, so maybe I'm talking myself into, I just asked for an impossible thing, even though, you know, it seems like it should be easy. So then you asked 2 parts of that question: what do you want, and what do you think of the plan? The plan, I don't want this plan necessarily, but let me suggest another one. Let's wind up the project. Let's do 1 or 2 calls where we sense make our experience so that we at least accomplish something. And then let's wind up and wait for the next iteration of the call to action to come to the fore. Bentley, if you think you're not going to get what you want out of, you know, what the lab has gotten itself into, if I don't think I've gotten what I want, or won't get what I want out of the lab, maybe we've constituted the lab poorly, or I think what actually happened is we got caught up in kind of an activation energy thing where everybody had activation energy, but we didn't know what it was for. And we kind of hoped that if we just danced around enough together, you know, something would come out of it, and maybe nothing came out of it, and maybe we should just, you know, call it good and do a write-up and wait for the next activation energy. Into that space, let me I think try to recall the activation energy situation. It was the activation energy for this iteration of SenseDoing, and if you'll remember, we have a previous iteration of SenseDoing that's like, I think, over a year old. But this iteration was a couple threads on the OGM list, which bubbled over and made everybody say, if we only had SenseDoing, this thing wouldn't be bubbling over like that, and we could actually like make sense of stuff. And that was, I think, the initial push where everybody said, yeah, let's do that. And then we all got into the SenseDoing channel or something. And it's like, okay, so let's mill around and figure out what we thought we would try to accomplish. So I think we drifted pretty far away from that, you know, initial activation energy, which is fine. It would be an interesting thing to kind of, I would love to see that history, you know, here's where we had energy to get something done together. Here's how we came together. Here's how we failed to gel, you know. We did the storming, farming, norming stuff. But we did the, you know, we never got past forming, you know, kind of. We started to touch norming, but we didn't really get there. We got stuck in forming, and we never got to do the other ones. I don't know.
Thank you for digging deeper into that. And anyone else, feel free to jump in. So I can see and understand your desire to build a playbook for sense making, and that did kind of overlap with my desire to explore tools and processes of sense making. They're slightly different. And then Joanne is specifically wants to do the sense making and the sense doing. Stacy's just here to support everyone, right?
I'm changing my mind a little bit.
Oh,
No.
are you on the sense making and the actual sense making and sense doing, and not the meta?
Well, I don't think this was as useless as you guys seem to think it was. I think, like, for me, having seen policy keys is something that I'm going to take with me and be able to introduce to other people. And I'm very interested in, once there is a good idea which direction to go, how do you present it to a public that, you know, I mean, there's so many, we're pretty homogenous in our values and the way we're thinking, but the rest of our society is not. And I want to say something, I don't know if it really fits in directly, but going with COVID, I know of 2 people that were in our conversational groups, not so much on the Zoom calls here, that wanted to put out misinformation. I had arguments with 2 people, wound up getting blocked. One is no longer alive, so that's not an issue. But these were serious things that were happening where they were spreading misinformation. And I would say, but you know, this isn't true. And they would say, that's not the point. So to me, being on screen, being held accountable for what you're saying, hearing why somebody wouldn't want something, all those things are really important. So.
Yeah, so I think we could spend a lot of time, or actually, Joanne, I don't have a fully formed thought, so if you have something.
You muted.
The H in my name is silent. It's Joanne. My parents are French Canadians. How we do it there? But the reason why I wanted to talk about, Peter said, you know, you should try this out. They're going to do sense building. They're going to talk about a topic you know stuff about. So I'm like, okay, the reason, Bentley, that I thought we could talk about it and then, you know, write down everything we thought and boil it down, try to figure out how to sense make. It's kind of, it sounds like, listening to Peter and you, that you guys don't have a blueprint of how to do sense making. So it's kind of like, let's say you're sense making onion. Don't know what onion is. Let's figure out sense making. You chop it, you cut it, you smell it, you cook it, you whatever. That's my idea. And then at the end, you write down what worked, what didn't, and you sense make from that. And that's what I thought conversation would be like, is like you take a topic like mass or air filtration, and you, from that, from trying different things, like we tried John's policy keys, and yes, last week we learned a little bit, saw Jerry doing his brain, and by talking, and like there's a topic, and let's try to make, I thought by talking and sense building and all that, that's how you learn how to sense build. You'd be like, okay, on this topic, this is the sense we came out of it. This is how we got the sense. So we think of it. Let's do the next topic now. Let's see if we could do the same. Or you could cut out by saying we spent too much time doing this. We don't need to spend this much time, blah, blah. So then you take the next topic and you see whether or not you could apply it to the next topic. And that's in my mind what I thought was going to happen. Instead of just talking about sense building without actually, you know, having some clay to play with and see if you could build something from it, you know, like it seems, I don't know if that made sense to anybody. But I'd also be interested to know, Stacy said she was with people, and it's like, that's not the truth, that's not the point. I feel like I missed the point of why you were saying that.
I think part of why I'm saying it is that when people do things in small groups, I'm noticing that it's always the same groups and you never hear from the outside, like there's no transparency. So I'm just speaking personally for myself. If I'm not in the room, I'm not able to see where the inaccuracy is coming from, or I may never get to meet somebody that I might have a piece of information for, they might have a piece of information for me. So just in general, it's not really related to this, but in general, I'm interested in the mixing of people, because when it's always the same people, that's not a good thing.
So Joanne, you're right, on several levels. Kind of a nuance is there. It's not that we don't have a plan. It's that we have hundreds of processes and tools. All of them are fall under the umbrella of sense making, and my emphasis was to play with the tools. And Pete's, I guess, was to develop a cohesive process that's reusable. And so the topic itself was kind of secondary. The process you're suggesting, I think, is a good one, and should probably be our first process, rather than a structured process, or a more detailed or specific one, structured process, because I think we'd learn more as a group of going through that than we would like policy keys or some of the other tools that we have. And then I think there's a meta discussion to have with Pete and anyone else that wants to be involved on, okay, so how did that thing go as a process? What do we want to take, or what things do we want to experiment to build this kind of repeatable process for when emergencies arise? So yeah, that's probably where the kind of confusion came. With that being said, if no one kind of disagrees, I'd almost like to, let's just do that process, have an open discussion, have a set aside a time brainstorming of what to do or how to figure out what to do, without using any specific tools and structures. And then after that, have a meeting, Pete, to close it and to evaluate this process and see what next steps we could do to build your repeatable process. but to not have any discussions on the process during the loose process. Everyone kind of like that? Yeah, so I guess kind of with that, if everyone's okay, I almost kind of want to just let's jump into the discussion and see what else, what are the questions do people have about masking or indoor air quality, or have the discussion, do we want to just focus on indoor air quality, which may have been the conclusion, may have been lost. And then when we feel like we've kind of explored and put enough on the table, someone can recommend that we move to brainstorming actions. What do you think? Sure.
So I am confused about sense building one thing. When you guys think of sense building, do you think about making sense of like a fire hose of information coming at you, or taking all this information and the sense building part is translating into something that will make sense to many people, where you can get many people to come see your point of view, that whatever you've decided about mass or air filtration or the next topic? Like, is it sense making in terms of making it sensible for other people to follow, or how do you get this information to make sense to yourself? Because you could have a bunch of smart people make sense of something, but if you can't communicate that to other people, so that's what I'm wondering. When you guys talk about sense making, is it sense making for yourselves, or sense making to be able to tell other people about it in a way that makes sense and they are accepting or open to it?
I think my scope includes both. But you're right, they are two different kind of thought processes. So the primary one that I think often gets ignored is the actual sense making, because I think there's a lot of studies on how to be kind of persuasive and how to be effective in communication. But a lot of it kind of assumes you know what's right in the first place. And I'm like, I don't think we know what's right. So I'm more on the first half, but a lot of times I'm also very considerate of how can we package this up in a way that other people can, because I don't like an unrepeatable process. So if our process was always, let's get in a room and discuss it, and oh, we know what to do, I think that is missing that clarification piece for other people, and not just communicating it like what we should do, but why and why we think that's the right thing to do, and handle other people's challenges to the accuracy of those things. So yeah, for me, it's the whole thing. Anyone else have a different opinion or focus? Cool. So with that being said, do we want, thinking about what we talked about indoor air quality and masking, does anyone have any questions or open questions on indoor air quality that we'd like to explore before we start talking about taking what actions can be taken? Go ahead, John.
The only thing why isn't it important to people? Seriously, like, why aren't we discussing it? Why aren't we pushing it? Why is it not important? People keep talking about the next pandemic. People are sick a lot because, in large part because of indoor air quality. Like, if you could reduce that, there's a lot of things. You could mask, you can never go out, but indoor air quality there's a lot of sickness in schools and work and stuff, but why aren't we talking about it? Why is it not important? Like, why are we letting this thing that scientists all say is really important, why are we just ignoring it, not doing anything about it?
Yeah, I kind of get the feeling when I think about that it's a lot of people don't have like, when I think about the things that I'm focusing on, my mom's moving in, my sister has bipolar, I got to figure out how to complete my job. So it's like, people have been getting sick and dying for tens of thousands of years. It's not it's a order of, and it's not that it's conscious, I guess, is even what I'm saying. It's putting out the fires that are closest. And the pandemic is closer than like climate change, right? But I know a lot of, if we were in the standard OGM meeting, people would be like, oh, food is the most important thing. The other person would say climate change is the most important thing. But for most people, I think it's my rent and my food is the most important thing. But that's not a good answer to your question. I think we can work on, part of our thing would be, how can we bring awareness to the importance of it? So that should definitely be part of our solution, I'd say.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I honestly think it's out. We just never thought of it. All we would need to do is hear it once on TV and everybody would be talking about it. I mean, it's really as simple as that, unfortunately.
Actually, can I ask, has anyone heard about it on TV, or is this all news to you?
Nope.
I think I've seen like one.
So
news
we
thing.
look at geeky stuff, Peter.
Yeah.
I was thinking back. I don't think and it kind of confused me a bit, because I was like, even during the whole pandemic thing, well, I mean, people were talking about building those boxes with events and stuff like that, but no one was saying, I mean, we put HIPAA, well, actually, I had MERV, high MERV things in my AC system because I've had allergies. But I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna put the fan on more frequently than before and increase my own indoor air quality. Of course, I think my system's a closed system, so I'm not getting more outdoor air. Of course, I'm not mixing with strangers either. But yeah, I was thinking that it was funny, because I did actually think that and say, why are we not having more of this conversation? But I don't think I did see anything about it. Otherwise, I would have been, oh, there's someone talking about it. And that's interesting. And I wonder if part of that's because for news, it's not controversial enough to be worth the clicks.
Well, I think the other thing is there was so much, so much conflict. So anything that even sounded like it would be something that would be regulated would just be thrown away. It wasn't even about what was happening. It was about who's trying to control who.
Yeah, there was a lot of information fatigue. And it's also, it's easy to think, oh, like if you listen for a couple minutes, if you watch John talking about policy keys about indoor air quality, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But if you come up, like Bentley did, kind of, if you come up with the idea on your own, you think through all of the things that would have to change in the world, right? Employers and building manufacturers and land people leasing buildings and a lot of kind of stuff. All of those are like a big block of stuff that you go, that problem is not worth even thinking about, because we can't fix it, is the way that you would think about it, without having a little bit of space of people saying, oh no, it would be possible. We could figure it out.
I remember on a community level in the beginning, like the schools were talking about it, only in the very beginning though.
I think the schools were talking about it, I think maybe because they were having problems with having kids mask, or maybe some parents were like, you're not going to mask my kids. And I'm wondering whether or not they talked, because the teachers are really concerned about it. They had like the older teachers who didn't want to get sick, and little kids, don't, especially if you live in a cold place and they have to eat inside. If you could clean the cafeteria air, or that just my guess.
I have a quick question, is what, do we have an idea of what amount of contagions are aerosolized? Right, is this going to also help with the flu, or is the flu pretty much just hand
Yeah,
to
it works
hand.
for flu and RSV and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, anything that's respiratory that you catch.
It also helps with like pollen, you know, allergies and stuff like that.
And
Yeah,
it also helps. We talked, I don't know if you were there, Bentley, but if
I've
you're
watched
someone was in a bus going from one city to another city, a 3-hour ride in Australia, and it was the summer there, and the air conditioning was on, and it was on recirculate, and she had her little CO2 meter, and it was like over 3,000. At that point, you're not thinking as clearly, and she was just concerned about having car accidents. So there's also that. It helps with, and I think maybe that might be a good focus if you're trying to convince people to clean the air up, is you don't test as well, you don't drive as well, you don't think as clearly when the CO2 is high, and you can't test, see how much virus is in the air. And so the only thing you could do is look at the level of CO2 to see how recirculated or how fresh the air is.
yeah, I mean,
don't know.
that's useful. It's a bit like, let's say we are in an environment where it's extremely yeah, I'm just thinking of the disconnect in the complexity between. So we have a lot of kind of different benefits that come from doing this. And they're interrelated in the way you handle it, right? So like if you can have a very filtered system that could help with the viruses that has no outdoor air, but you're still having the CO2, you could fix the CO2. But if you're in a bus pulling air from the outside, cooling it, and you're pushing that from front to back, you know, it's making the virus thing worse. So we'd also have to think about, when we're developing communications about this, how can you do it in such a way that that complexity doesn't reduce people hearing about it.
What about the electrical needs for that? Like what kind of a drain is that?
Yeah, the additional costs, not just of the correction, but
Running it all.
ongoing additional costs, which heat exchangers could reduce. But once again, that's additional infrastructure. Because now I'm thinking of my own house. It's like, oh, I would like to have a positive pressure system with the heat exchanger. But yeah. Yeah.
Thing
Let me
is
see.
that we used to, if we tell people, you know, we worked hard at clean water, you can't imagine having dirty water coming out of your tap, or even dirty water flushing your toilet. So why is air not included in that? It's kind of like when they gave Social Security, Medicare for older people, but they excluded prescriptions. It's like, you know, you're doing one thing to keep you, maybe that's not a good analogy, but like clean air should be something that we all want. When you walk into a building, if only we could get people to start thinking that way. When I walk into a building, I want to know this air is not going to get me sick. And either by making me not be able to focus as well because the CO2 level is so high, or making it more likely I'll come down with something that'll knock me out for a week or two because it's a virus and I'm catching it. More likely to catch it in this atmosphere.
Yeah, I think with water quality, not that this is an excuse, but I think what goes through people's mind is that when you have bad water quality, you also tend to be like vomiting a lot. It's an immediate like thing. It's more visible. So it's a good analogy. But when we're talking about the communication, we'll have to keep in mind that it's not quite as obvious. And also kind of people, clean water is something we also don't think about in the United States. So we kind of forget what it's like, but it's still a good analogy. Those are just
I
my
think
thoughts.
there's a societal thing where like before there was clean water, it was probably like, yeah, people die of cholera, so what's the big deal, you know? And then afterwards, you know, you raise public awareness enough to get public works projects going, and then it subsides back into non-awareness again, right? It's like, well, that's somebody else's job, and thank God we have people worrying about water quality standards and, you know, making sure plumbing works and all that kind of stuff, but I don't have to think about it. So I think it's kind of the same thing with air quality, you know, it's just nobody's ever even thought that it's possible. Like, well, of course we get a couple colds a year and flu every other year. That's not a big deal, you know. Why would I even worry about that? And you know, it's like, so Joanne and I especially, and all of us here probably, you know, if you step aside, and we haven't had colds or flu for 3 years because, you know, we've been avoiding COVID too. It's like, it's actually kind of nice not to have a cold. And I don't feel like a cold is, you know, something I gotta have, you know, a couple times a year to survive, you know. It's like, it's not that much fun. I like my clean air, you know. I like the idea of not having viruses that, you know, are going to infect me. But it's not an obvious, you know, if you're just living day by day, and like you said, Bentley, there's a bunch of other stuff with, you know, attracting your attention that you got to manage, you know. Air quality is not one of the top things that you're going to think of.
So the thing that I thought when you said people don't think about air quality, Bentley, you're able to focus on things like food and rent, your mother and your sister, and not water quality because you have a government that mandates water quality and local, state, whatever, who has to take care of it. Look at Flint, Michigan, and look at Florida. Didn't they have some kind of something and they had to boil their water or something? When it happened, the communities, imagine, Bentley, if you lived in Flint, Michigan, or in Florida where they had to boil their water for a while, that would be on your list of some awful thing you have to think about every single day. Is it even safe to shower in my thing? You know, like um, but so we're walking into buildings where you know you're going to get sick if you are. Well, you might not know, but scientists know there's a high chance likelihood you're going to get sick if you spend time in these buildings and we're not clean. And but air filtration could greatly reduce it, and we're not doing anything about it. And the thing about the Flint, Michigan thing with the lead is that they are worried about long-term problems with kids developing brains, what it does to lung. And the jury's still out on everything COVID's going to do, but COVID is causing right now long-term damage to people. Some of it, like they've documented heart, liver, lung, even brain stuff that they believe will be permanent. I don't know about the brain being permanent, but some of the heart and the lung damage seems to be permanent. And so, you know, here's something that permanently could, I mean, you know, if you look on long COVID boards, these people don't have hope that they're going to get better. And I hope they do get better, but you don't, I guess if it was giving us diarrhea right away, we'd notice it more. Like the minute, but so we're not thinking about water because we live in a place where water is pretty good. But if we were in Flint, Michigan, or if we were in the place where they had to boil water for a while, suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how important it was. And I take it for granted.
If we had better air quality, do we suspect that would change the recommendations on masking? Like there'd be fewer instances we need to wear a mask or not?
I think so. You don't think so? I do.
I think I still think, and I think the CDC is pretty lame on the masking thing, but I still think if you're testing positive for COVID and they are letting you out of isolation, you should still be masking. There is no reason for passing it. Like you could have great air quality in a building, but someone I know had to go to the emergency room. They have COVID, they're like urgent care over the weekend. They're like, my wife has COVID. And they're like, doesn't matter, come in. And when they talked to the doctor, they said, don't you care about COVID? He's like, no, I've had it many times. I don't care. And they're like, so when you're sick, you wear a mask. You try to protect your patients. Like, no, I don't care. And like, that's kind of awful, you know? So I still think if you're testing positive for COVID, if you think you might have COVID, I think masking, at least maybe masking would be if you're sick with COVID or if you're sick with something. I think that should be a polite thing. Nowadays, when I go to the store, I'm always masked. Like I go to the food store and someone's coughing and they're sick, I'm thinking to myself, these are the people who should be wearing a mask. Because if you could put a mask on people who are contagious, that would greatly reduce it. And you could, even in a really greatly cleaned air, wonderful air thing, if someone's got COVID or something else near you, you're going to catch it. COVID, it's really quick. You don't have to be around it for half an hour to get it.
Yeah, I was
One of-
actually thinking you shouldn't be out if you had COVID. So I wasn't even thinking that far ahead. I was
But
just,
people are going out. People are going out with COVID.
One of the things that happened with the masking thing is it became all or nothing because you couldn't have any subtlety about the messaging. So, you know, the messaging on the public health side, on the sensical public health side, not the CDC, is like, you know, wear certain kinds of masks in these conditions, and pretty soon it's like, okay, let's all wear masks all the time, no matter what, right? And then the opposite side was, let's never wear masks. Let's, you know, never, you know, and even in a medical situation, we shouldn't wear masks because masks are terrible. So we went into this, you know, bimodal thing, which was really dangerous. So it's a great question, Bentley. If you look at if you in the chat, I happened to just paste in the summary article from that, or summary paragraph from that article. It says the answer is source control, ventilation, and filtration. Source control is wearing a mask if you're sick. So it doesn't make sense to have, you know, try to keep your air clean and reduce the viruses and have people walking in there and just like blasting viruses into the air. So in a perfect world, back to Jerry's question, back to the way Jerry phrased it, what would a healthy society do? You know, in Japan, it's incredibly embarrassing. Like you would rather die than go out with a cold without a mask. It's like as soon as you have little sniffles, even if you're sure they're just allergies, you march right over to the 7-Eleven, you know, holding your thing the whole time, and you buy a mask right away. Otherwise, you die of embarrassment, you know. So I'm sure Americans will never be that embarrassed, but it makes a lot of sense, you know. It just, you know, it's like a thing that you would do, you know. And you know, when you're super acute and sick, you just don't go out. But there's, in a cold or a flu or something like that, there's a period of time where you're getting around and, you know, you're doing stuff. You need to, you should wear a mask when you're breathing stuff out. Not that I think that'll happen, but, or maybe it will. I kind of have I don't wear a mask. I don't want to wear a mask all the time forever outside, although maybe at this point I'm thinking I will. And when I mean outside, I mean with, you know, in crowded places with people. But I can kind of imagine in a couple of years, it's kind of going to come around. You mean people have been dying and people have having heart attacks and people have cognitive difficulties and it lasts for months or years because we're catching COVID all the time. How about if we just, you know, get to the point where we at least have source control and indoor air quality? That doesn't mean that everybody has to wear a mask all the time. It doesn't mean that we have to have lockdowns, but if we just do some simple things that are pretty straightforward, you know, we would stop heart attacks and, you know, brain fog and, you know, liver damage and, you know, all the other stuff that happens, you know, from this thing that's kind of like a cold. It's not really a cold.
Yeah, I had no real intuition on that, so I wanted to ask just to.
It's a great question.
I don't know if y'all know, I don't know if y'all know who Diana Cohen is. She's a YouTuber. She's called Physics Girl. She came down with long. So I've been a supporter of hers on Patreon for years. She just came down with long COVID. She hasn't been able to produce a video for months. Went to the ER recently. I doubled my Patreon for no content because she needs it. So yeah, that's kind of an example of if, you know, that may be one of the data points.
Yeah, do Stacy and Peter know about her?
I recognize the name, but not really.
Yeah, do you have any more to say about that, Joanne?
Oh, just, yeah, she was known as Physics Girl, and she used to post a lot of cool stuff, and I mean, she got to a point where she couldn't even lift her head off her bed. She's like got severe long COVID, like severe.
Yeah, I would love to see her video analysis of what happened, but she's not at the point, like, we don't know if she'll be
Yeah.
able to.
Was she vaccinated before she got sick? Do you know, Bentley?
I'm sure she was.
Because she only recently,
I
she
d-
didn't get sick in 2020, right?
Right, no, I think she got,
Oh.
yeah, I think she mentioned at one point when she got sick, and it was after the vaccines were out.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is,
And she was
yeah,
young and fit.
I don't know that I saw it stated that way, but my recollection of the events would say that that's likely what it is she was vaccinated at the time she got it, which,
And she was super young, super fit, healthy,
and a scientist.
and a scientist. Yeah. And
It goes to show that
yeah.
that we're all taking that risk. And you know, I took that risk right now because I'm positive for COVID. And I lucked out.
I think that Pete and Joanne are like an exception, because I think most people have really, I was super, super, super careful in the beginning, you know, and I did well for a couple of years. I only associated with like a handful of people, and we were all super careful. And, you know, now it's like, I mean, I still wear a mask in a supermarket, not the kind that you wear. It's just a cloth mask, but I keep my distance. I don't talk to people.
Stacey, if we could get you to switch to an N95, we could send you like a link, or because a cloth mask doesn't do much. It's kind of like trying to keep water in a sieve, you know, in a strainer. But because we want to keep you healthy,
Yeah,
not because we think we know better.
No, I absolutely, it's been in my mind that I want to order one, but I just want to say how uncomfortable it makes you feel when you're the only one wearing a mask. And I've been in that situation so many times. It's just, and I'm pretty much, I mean, Pete will tell you, I will buck the system. So I will be that one wearing it, but it takes a toll on you. It really does take a toll.
So when I'm with strangers, Peter says he feels bad being the only one masked. I don't care, because I just think to myself, I have not been sick in 3 years. Literally, no cold, no anything. The time that it very bothers me is when you're with relatives or something like that, or close, you know, and you're getting together, you've decided to get together, but you're masking and you're bringing your food plate outside to eat when everybody else is inside, and they're looking at you not understanding, and you wonder if you're offending them, thinking you're germy, and like our adult daughter said that she's very hurt by us doing this in front of relatives, and it's like, you know, she doesn't understand how committed we are. We don't want COVID. You know, we might get it because everyone's eventually going to get it. But if we could, you know, never get it or only get it once, we still want to never get it. But she's in her 20s and she's still, like, they're in Paris right now, she and her husband. Peter and I have traveled. Like, if we don't travel for a couple of years, we're fine. We've traveled. You know, if we don't do restaurants, we've done restaurant. Like, you know, there are things. I think it's the age you're at.
The problem, you know, I feel for people. I've actually overheard people that are immune compromised saying they're uncomfortable to wear their masks because people are saying things to them. That almost makes me want to wear my mask more in solidarity.
And someone recently asked, what's your best comeback for, if a stranger comes up to you and says, why are you wearing a mask? And my favorite so far of everything I've heard, some people say you just say, oh, because I have COVID, do you want me to take it off so you can catch it? But my favorite is, well, I find that it helps keep my nose out of other people's business, and I highly recommend it.
I like
And I
that.
thought that was a good one. But No one's asked me yet, so I haven't been able to say this to anybody.
You muted
You're
Bentley.
muted.
Yeah, I wore a mask on the plane both ways for our trip each way, 4.5 hour. Yeah, I didn't have any issues on the announcements. They say, you know, you don't have to wear a mask, but please respect the decision of people that do. So that was a little helpful hearing that. I did not wear it in most of the airports, which were not crowded. Like if I was well, actually, I put it on prepping for the boarding, and then I was like standing for the back and stuff. And honestly, I don't know that I would have done that if it wasn't, well, done it as much. I think I would have, but I was much more conscious about after having kind of this discussion. My wife, you know, yeah, I didn't get a cold for a good year and a half, maybe two. It was nice not, you know, I knew everything was allergies, right? So that's a really good bonus. There was some other thing I was going to relate. Yeah. So it's definitely difficult with family. Oh my God, especially my family. Which I guess everyone says. Yeah. I'd like to maybe we only got about 15 more minutes. So I think we could kind of keep chatting, but maybe for next meeting, anyone has any last kind of follow-up questions, then let's kind of brainstorming what actions we can take, including creating artifacts for that other people would find valuable, or actual actions we can take, like contacting Congress people or stuff like that. And actions we'd recommend other people to do, like, you know, sending out to OGM. I hear there's an OGM newsletter now. That we could, you know, this is kind of recommendations from the SenseDoing group, stuff like that. So feel free during next week to brainstorm on your own, and then we can come together and see what we want to do. I didn't mean to shut down the conversation. I know I had other questions, but I think I'm going kind of blank now. Go ahead, Joanne.
So I have a question. So Peter and I came into this very opinionated and on the extreme side of we want to avoid COVID and feeling like we knew tools to avoid it, including things like air filtration. So at home, you can control, you could get stuff. So if someone's friends over or workers over, you know how to clean your air. Or actually, we got our filters. The first part is at the very beginning, Peter and I didn't know if one of us would get it and the other one wouldn't. And we wanted to make sure there are ways if you wear N95s in the house and you have air filters, there are families that successfully have had only the one person have COVID and they haven't spread it to anybody else and they live in the same house. But I want to know whether or not you two, because you're the only other two people here today, has this discussion changed your mind about air filtration or masks? And do you think it's, I think or you'd have to take them individually, like air filtration, do you think it's something that we could start a movement? If you thought it made sense, is it something that's worth trying to change? There's Bentley, earlier you said, you know, a lot of people would be like climate change and all that other stuff. Climate change is very common. You can't just clean air inside buildings, poof, you're done. Climate change is like a multi thing and involves farming and transportation, a lot of stuff. But is this something that how, from the other point of view, like, is it seem like Peter and I are just crazy thinking that air filtration is important and it's really not? Or is it something that what your thoughts?
So I'll go. I had forgotten, but about 15 years ago, our elementary school, some sort of fumes were coming up and people were getting lightheaded. They moved our kids to another school. It must have been for about 8 months. And then the summer was over and my son had graduated. And honestly, I don't remember, but I think they actually did put in an air filtration system. But again, I don't remember, and I hadn't thought about it. But what this conversation did is put it back in the forefront of my mind. Like, yeah, we should be. This is something, of course, we should be doing this.
Yeah, I'd like to, I don't think y'all are crazy. Well, let me say, I don't think you're crazy about this topic. Pete, I might think is crazy about you. No. I think I hadn't even, so I thought about indoor air quality when COVID was happening. There's too much kind of going on to dig into it, and then I forgot. And then you bringing it back up is very helpful. So, like Stacy said, and bringing it back up to the front of mind is valuable. And it is something that I would like. I agree, and I agree more forcefully after the information I've heard here that it's something that should be done. I think I would have probably like said, "Oh, that's a good idea," if I'd heard it. Even like, should we put high MERV filters and have outdoor air? I don't think I would have thought about the outdoor air thing, which is really silly. Because I know about sick buildings. I know about there's some building where they tried to put enough plants in there where it would have the air, the CO2 removed enough for all the occupants within the building, which doesn't help with the virus issue, of course. So I guess I was kind of aware of that. But after kind of like discussing it and having this additional information, it is of a higher priority. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question. Yes and yes, basically.
And it frustrates me when people on the news talk about the next pandemic, we should be prepared and all this other stuff, and they don't talk about air filtration, because that's something we can do now. If it's the next virus, the next pandemic is something that you breathe. If you did it now, you'd greatly reduce. Some people were thinking in Africa, the cases weren't as high as they thought because a lot of people are outdoors. They're not indoors a lot. So, but I'm amazed that people could talk about preparing for the next pandemic and never mention air filtration, doing it now.
Yeah, and it's funny. And I think when I was talking about that, it didn't come back up. I know I'd thought about it earlier, but yeah, it didn't, those are not as steeped into it. So yeah, I think it's a great thing that raising awareness and such as extent that it would be top of people's minds and they would understand the true value that I think would give a benefit to society.
Because what you want, Bentley, is exactly what you said. You're busy with your stuff you have to get done. Peter and I are busy with our stuff we have to get done. Stacy's got her stuff we want to get done. Nobody wants to be thinking about this. And we don't think about water quality for the most part because it's already been handled for us. And I want to stop thinking about this.
I also think, are we talking about private homes getting air filtration, or are we talking on pushing for public buildings to get air filtration? That's a different approach as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And then in your home, you could do what you want. I mean, because if you think about it, some people smoke in their home with the windows closed, like, would you want to walk into a place? Would you want to, like, I think that's a dangerous thing. Or other people, whatever.
No, but for that, for the private part, just educating on what's available is a positive. I remember we were having a lot of blackouts and my ex was a contractor. I was like, let's get a generator. And after we got a generator, everybody was getting generators. It's like, sometimes it just takes bringing it into your awareness to realize, oh, we could do this.
The only thing is that some people, like Peter and I, have the luxury of buying air filters for the house, a CO2 reader, some people won't. And for people who really are living paycheck to paycheck or might not even below that, who live in high density housing, we might have to talk about landlords having to clean the community spaces, like the hallways, the elevators, because an elevator is or even a stairwell with all the doors closed on each floor. You know, someone walks through that with COVID, it's going to hang out there for a while. The next person goes in, like, you know. So it might come down to residential areas, but the community spaces, the public spaces of a residential area.
Yeah, funny, you know, y'all were talking about shared air in apartments. Funny story. I was living in an apartment and I did notice that I smelled Indian food about several times a week. And I realized it was my neighbors, but it wasn't a problem until they actually moved out. And then one day there were fumes all in our apartment. And we didn't know why. And I called the apartment complex and they said they were resurfacing the bathtub in the apartment next door, but it wouldn't have affected us. I'm like, well, we can smell it. But they didn't send anyone over to smell it till it dissipated and we'd already moved. You know, I had me, my son, my friend, and her son. So we bought a hotel room. So we're trying to get them to do the hotel room to pay for the hotel room. But they wouldn't because there was no evidence. I opened up the vent and I could see a hole from our vent space into their vent space about this big. So when their air conditioner wasn't on and ours was on, it was literally sucking air from their apartment.
Yeah.
And I showed that to them, and then I had to send an email to their corporate office and the local news station, both here and the corporate office, to get them to do something. But yeah, that just kind of shows. Also, maybe just to let people know, you know, if you're smelling your neighbor's cooking, you're sharing air with them. But yeah, that was a crazy time. And now if I you know, I guess I don't know if I would have even thought, oh, I'm smelling their food, that means that we're exchanging air. I need to go check our vents to see if I could. Now I know to look whether the vents connected. And also in my mom's apartment, I put in a high filtration filter, and then the maintenance guys come by and switch out my mom's filter, and they're like, oh, we'll do that for you. And you look at their filter and it's like, I can read through it. This is not this is keeping maybe cat hair out. I don't know what you're hoping that'll do. Don't replace my, you know, $5 filter with your 10-cent filter. So I had to put a sticker on there to say don't do this, and they're actually going to do that again this week. Now for her, that's more allergies because most likely her air isn't being shared with anyone, and actually her apartment complex opens up. It's an open hallway, and they do actually have ceiling fans that are on all the time in the hallways, and it's open air. So it's probably not that. It's probably safer than a lot of places, but yeah, you're thinking about that.
I just want to go back to the buildings and say that if I were trying to convince people, I would definitely start with schools, because first of all, like Joanne mentioned, just the cognitive functioning, that's one thing. But also kids are spreaders. So, you know, getting them at, you know, school, and plus parents who don't want to go through having their kids not go to school anymore like we had over the past years, there might be more incentive. So I think schools would be a good place to start.
The only thing is money. Any, you know, if it's, it would be nice if the federal or state government provided funds for it. And it was not just general fund money, but it had to be, you know, reimbursement for the specific, like if they said what kind of thing, because I think in some of the COVID packages, they had money in there for like cleaning air, and I don't know that it was used for that. Yeah, but I think that's a great start, Stacey.
And when it comes to money, I mean, even to go into the health part, maybe to see if there's some funding that would come, you know, saying, you know, kids with asthma, things like that, you know, make it even more health related and show the health savings.
I have a question. Why do you think people don't seem to care that people are getting sick and it's preventable?
Because they think, a lot of them just think it's like anything. It's just like another flu, and you can't, you know, you just can't do it. And, you know, tests don't work. You get false negatives. Masks don't work. There's
Masks do work.
no, I'm saying in their mind, it's just that I don't think they see that whatever they could do is going to create enough of a result. I think they just, and I mean, a lot of it's just psychology. If you don't see the people around you getting concerned, then you're like, maybe I'm overreacting. I can tell you that's what happened to me. I mean, when the vaccines first came out, I was going back and forth because I had some very, very, very smart friends who were totally against the vaccines. And I was reading everything. And again, I said it on one of the calls. It wasn't until I saw rich people bribing to get to the top of the line that I said, I'm getting my vaccine. That's it. That proved it for me. But it's very easy to, be swayed when there's so many people around you. That's human nature.
I've always known that's true. More so, this pandemic showed me, I didn't realize how influential what other people do is. Most of the people I know who don't, like everybody else we know in real life, they don't wear masks. And the reason is nobody else is wearing it. We don't do that. Like I've actually been told, oh, we don't do that. People don't do that. Like, why are you wearing a mask? Nobody's like, I can't go someplace with a mask. People don't do that. And it's kind of weird. Yeah.
I'm kicking myself because, I got COVID in November and I'm just so mad at myself because I still don't always feel right. I still feel like a sluggishness. And yeah, I'm upset with myself. But I haven't had company in my house for a really, really long time because I don't want to make them wear a mask. So I rather just not invite anybody to come over and then I don't have to deal with it.
Did you hear the story of our daughter and her husband spending 2 weeks here? We wore the mask. We never asked them. And the other thing too, they used to live down here. So every night they'd go out and visit friends and, go to restaurants, and their dancers dance. So Peter and I wore the mask. Our bedroom was off limits to them. We have a half bathroom downstairs and we have one shower. The shower has 2 doors. One connects to our bedroom, one connects to the rest of the house. So they couldn't go into our bedroom. So when we ate with them, we would go in the bedroom and eat separately from them. And that kind of upset our daughter. And I'm like, look, we welcome you here. You could go out every night. We're not telling you not to go out every night. We're not even asking you to wear masks. It's just, this is us. We don't want to get it. And we had the HEPA filter. So when the shower, because there was only one room with a shower, we would use the filters and clean. Like we would shower first thing in the morning and then we'd say, okay, you guys can have it. And then we'd clean it with air filters for 2 weeks. And they didn't have COVID the whole time we were here, but we'd figured this all out in case, one of us got sick. We wouldn't want the other one of us, if you could catch it early enough. But yeah, we're not going to have people over for dinner here but we have an outdoor place if we wanted to share with people. But even still, like, so if we had people over for dinner outside and we ate outside, Peter and I would wear a mask inside because people probably would use our bathroom. And after they left, we'd clean the place out for a couple of hours before taking our mask off. So we did it. We're weird. We're very strange that way. But the thing is, I think, and how everybody thinks, I think it's normal. If you don't want to get COVID,
but you also have each other to support you.
Yeah,
so
we do. That's a huge thing.
Yeah.
People who I know who live alone, it is harder, or people who have young kids. Because if I had young kids, I don't know what I would do. You can't keep your kids.
Glad I don't. That was the first thing when COVID hit. I was so grateful that I didn't have kids in school. I would have just.
Yeah. Wouldn't that make it harder?
Oh my
God.
God.
I don't know if Bentley has kids in school, but.
No, my son's 30.
Okay.
And I only see him every other week. So luckily enough. Well, that's about the end of our time. If people would kind of brainstorm about suggested activities and actions we can take to improve the situation, we'll brainstorm on that. And of course, if any other questions come up, it won't be that structured. And then probably the meeting after that, if we feel like we get it all done, then Pete and I and whoever else can kind of talk through SenseDoing experiment and figure out what's next.
Can I ask a question? Have you guys never heard of, has no one published a book on how to sense make out of information overload? Has that book not been published?
I think there's lots of books with specific techniques. Right now, I don't know if there's someone who's done kind of an overview of all the different ways of doing it. But there's lots of, like there's participedia.net, I think, that has like hundreds of tools, but sense making is also not a defined term. So there's a big space of people working on it from lots of different angles. I don't know that there's and Pete can correct me, like a consolidated view or opinion on how to do it generally.
And I actually, Bentley, was it you talking about Snowden, or was
No.
it Jack?
It was Jack.
There actually,
the Canavan
yeah, and Snowden actually has his product is called SenseMaker. There are people who have technology for sense making, but the knowledge of how to use it and when to use it, how it works, is not well distributed and not.
And I think they're
it's
usually
an emerging science. It's
kind
not.
of yeah, and it's kind of narrow. Like even what he has in his part is, it fits a niche. It wouldn't quite fit unedited into what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
Hopefully that gives you a scope of the space, Joe. All right.
Are you going to write up a couple sentences for the channel about where we're going, what to brainstorm on this week?
Yes. We'll do a quick summary. Probably when I post the video in a few hours.
I will. I won't promise, but I'll try to kind of wrap that into a short thing in Plex this week. Because we're kind of at the point where it's, coming down to something, or we're.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised also if it just seemed like it wasn't enough, and maybe wait till after the next meeting when we actually have some recommendations.
Do we want to?
Unless you just want to give a general update.
Yeah, I think a general update and kind of a call for participation a little bit,
I don't know if we introduce other people if we're not going to be back to square one.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. You're right. So maybe I'll wait. You're right.
See what I write, see what you think.
Okay.
I trust your judgment.
Thanks for the call. You've moderated well today, Bentley.
You did, Bentley.
And,
yeah.
Thank you.
You did.
And get well soon.
Yeah. All right. See you next time.
You stop the recording and stay on for 1 second.